Hello, everyone, and welcome into another episode of the TakeCast. Davis Maddock with you, joined by Cody Alexander from matchquarters.com. Had an article that really just sparked my interest, and I've been wanting to do this show for a while, because this was a thing last year in the NFL too. Scoring went down. All we hear about is too high safeties, shell coverage. These quarterbacks, they can't possibly do anything. I mean, it's unfair. We should ban it. We should ban two high safeties. Only one safety. Only one safety. So Cody wrote this article, Where's the Offense in the NFL? He's got this fantastic Substack that you can find at matchquarters.com. Cody, we are here 3 consecutive weeks in the NFL. Scoring is down. 38.6 points was the average total points in an NFL game on Sunday, man. What are we doing here? What are we doing?
I know. I feel you. As a defensive guy, it's like I'm finally like, it's about time. It's interesting. I wrote a book called Hybrids, the Making of a Modern Defense in 2018, and it kind of went through the cyclical nature of the NFL, especially football in general, and how we kind of do these ebbs and flows. We get really pass heavy, then we go back to the run. This one is a little bit different because, really the quarterback play has been probably the worst since the late 70s. I think is the last time they saw a dip like this. So this is different. And so I'm also really interested to see how the season plays out.
Yeah. So like you mentioned, as a defensive guy, because my childhood best friend is a defensive coordinator at the college ranks. He's at Eastern Michigan right now. I've got some ball knowers in my life who, the fantasy football way of approaching it, like, oh, we just got to make it easier on the offense. Got to make it easier on the offense. If there's not points being scored, we got to legislate it away. It's anyone's fault. It can never be, well, maybe this defense just did a really good job. It can never be that. It's a problem to be solved. So as a defensive guy, as you're watching this revolution, offenses can't score points. I mean, does it feel earned? Because the sense I get from the offensive guys a lot of time is, well, I don't know how much it's earned on the defensive end. It's actually terrible offensive line play, coordinators who don't get it, really bad quarterback play. I mean, we've seen a lot of really bad quarterback play. Just kind of how does that feel on your end as a defensive guy?
Well, I think defenses have finally caught up. And I think that you have to remember we're getting a younger generation of defensive coordinators in the NFL as well that are willing to do different things. I think the way that they're teaching players, schematic fluidity has been something that has not necessarily been part of the NFL. And what I mean by that is you can run almost anything that you have in your play sheet from any personnel that you have. Mike Macdonald really made this quote unquote famous with the Ravens, kind of retooling that Raven system, because I think what you see is if you watch Wink Martindale's defenses with the Giants, and then if you watch Michigan, but then you go and you watch a Mike Macdonald or a Jesse Minter who are running the exact same playbook. That playbook has not changed since the 90s. What's the difference? The difference is the way that they're implementing it, the way that they're teaching it, the way that they're tooling things together, and also going away from playing cover one blitz centric defense and just giving the space to the offense. So I think what we're seeing here is offensive coordinators are now caught in a lurch because defenses now know the rules of the spread game just as well as the offensive coaches.
That's pretty interesting. I don't even really know this. I have a pretty good sense of how offensive plays work. Like, okay, we're calling, I guess, the mesh. I read that book, Perfect Pass, a couple of years ago, like everyone else did. So like, I've got a really good idea. Like, okay, the offensive line kind of has their responsibilities. A lot of the time they're going to have a zone that they're responsible for. The running back knows, like, okay, I've got these options. The wide receiver knows I have this option. How does a defensive play call come in? Like, let's say we are doing this cover two, this two high safety thing, and the 11 defensive players have their responsibility. But as you mentioned, in where did the offense go? The new deal is the defenses are really doing a great job of disguising who is responsible for what. And that's confusing a lot of these young quarterbacks. But how does that play call go in? And then how does each defensive player maintain like schematic integrity on every down?
Right. So what happened probably about 10 to 15 years ago when the 4-2-5 really become Bud Foster, Gary Patterson, got really big in college football. What they started doing was divorcing the front from the actual coverage call. So what ends up happening It used to be you set the front, the coverage adjusted to the front, meaning wherever the extra gap was, we were going to fill that with a secondary player, usually a safety. This is the age of the box safety. And then in the NFL, because it's the NFL, you play man coverage. That's what you do. And now cover two has been around since the 50s experimentally. It kind of gave birth in the 70s. Bud Carson is actually kind of the godfather of cover two. And then Dungy gets all the credit for Tampa 2, even though he stole it from the Steelers playbook and just decided to run it full time. So it used to be you set the front, the coverage then fixes that. Then if you want to run a too high shell, so you want to run cover two or you want to run quarters, you then have to adjust the front, meaning you have to close a gap somewhere. So what ends up happening is whether you're a 5 down front or a 4 down front, there's natural bubbles in it. In an odd front, you typically have that bubble in the A gap, which most people aren't running A gap power, even at the NFL level, unless you're like North Dakota State. You're not really running A gap power ad nauseum, right? So most people want to attack the B gap. This is where the RPO comes into play, right? You have a 4 down front, 4-2-5 gets really popular. You have a 4 down front. Where is the conflict player? He's in the B gap. So then we're going to attack that player. We're going to force him to make it to fit the run. And then we're then going to then throw the ball. I think what we're seeing now is kind of a meshing of it is actually going to be coverage first. What do we have to do to defend the passes that we're seeing? Then we are going to adjust the front accordingly and to make that. So what you see, like a great example of this is San Francisco, the Jets, the Texans, and the 49ers. They all come from that same little tree that Saleh kind of started in 2018. That is really a branch from the Pete Carroll system. But they just said, look, we're going to run everything 4 down. We're going to base in quarters and cover 1. And then we're going to have to win inside. So if you go and you look, everybody's like, well, what's the problem with the 49ers defense? Well, they lost a ton of depth up front and primarily inside. They still have edges, but if you can't stop anybody inside and you don't have those inside presence, you can't have linebackers play in the back end. And so that's kind of where these teams now are kind of fitting is what are they going to do on the front end? And then setting that up, but it's really there to assist the back end and what we're going to. So it's now a coverage first mentality, which is why a guy like Saban has become kind of the be all end all at the college level. And then obviously Belichick because of him and just all the Super Bowls defensively at the NFL level.
So why did cover 2, people talk a lot about Vic Fangio. Your article talks a lot about Vic Fangio. That obviously the Tampa 2 that kind of everyone knows about. Why did Tampa 2? Because again, as someone who is watching it now, I'm like, how the fuck do you beat this? The answer can't possibly be running for 5.5 yards per play because even good running plays are not as good as a mediocre passing play in the aggregate. And I don't think this is true after this weekend, but through the first 2 weeks, there were actually more explosive running plays than passing plays. And I mean, I also get the sense defensive coordinators hate that shit. A defensive coordinator watching Bijan Robinson just be like, all right, well, there's only a safety to beat. Like, I'm just going to go run for 17 yards. Like, why not? Like, a defensive coordinator hates giving up easy running plays. Why did the cover 2 get less pop? Why did defenses go away from it in the first place?
Right. And so what ends up happening if you really look at those Tampa 2 defenses, the Buccaneers and the Bears, Bears were a little bit different because Urlacher was actually a very large human being and could hold up in the middle. He just was an alien. Point taken though, you have to have a Hall of Fame Mike linebacker.
It's the Jims and the Joes, not the X's and O's. That's what I always say.
Always players over plays. The other problem with that is that you are essentially you kind of are playing a lighter front as well because you're really trying to jet the front, meaning that you're really trying to pass rush all the time. So what offenses did in the early 2000s, they just went back to Neanderthal ball. They said, fine, we're just going to pack everything in. We're going to put a fullback back on the field. We're going to get a glorified tackle to play tight end, and we're just going to run power and counter and boot, and we're going to do all that. The Broncos, with the wide zone stuff has always kind of been there. And so that's what we're going to do. do. And so what ends up happening is these teams that were Tampa 2 based, they have to pivot and they have to get heavy again. So this is where the 3-4 comes back in, because now you can put a glorified defensive tackle at Mike linebacker. He doesn't have to cover anybody. And what happens, and this is a typical cycle in the NFL. So you get condensed and everything gets run heavy, and then people start spreading out. The problem that we see now, though, is that we're in the post-spread era. The spread has trickled up from the college level, those deep shots by Art Briles, the air raid Mike Leach stuff, which is essentially the West Coast offense just supercharged. Now what we see is these NFL offensive coordinators have now realized, like, hey, passing's much analytically is much better than running. Running the ball is going to elongate drives. Elongating drives leads to more turnovers. You kind of run to win, you pass to score. I mean, that's really how the game is played. And defensive coaches, and look, I'm part of the new generation. I'm 38 years old, so I'm part of that new generation that grew up playing 7-on-7. I don't know what an offense is like without it having at least 3 receivers on the field, right? So now we're more accustomed to being like, okay, we give up a 5-yard run, that's fine. 10 years ago, you give a 5-yard run, I mean, your defense coordinator is trying to punch you through your face mask, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, people are like, you're getting fired, and I think like we've seen that shift in psyche. And I think that that's the turnover that we're seeing in the NFL right now, is that this shift in psyche defensively, we're finally to where defensive coordinators are okay with a 5-yard run on first down, because that means it's 2nd and 5 and you're passing the ball. That to me is where, one, how we got rid of cover 2, and then why it kind of the different iterations. We don't have Tampa. Tampa's not back, but we're more too high coverage structures. But also we're okay with it, because I think we saw this. The Vikings are a great example of this past 2 weeks. We're going to give you your yards between the 30s, but when you get into the red zone, you're not going to be able to score because we've condensed the field. The passing is completely different. Now you got to run the ball. And so now you become predictable. And so I think that that's kind of where we're at defensively in the NFL.
And how much of this would you prescribe to just bad offensive line play? Lack of continuity, not a ton of great guys coming out from college. I as you were talking, I'm wondering, like, have offensive linemen gotten smaller? Is that because I know, like, for example, like the Mike Leach team, some of those Cliff Kingsbury, Texas Tech teams, like there would be tackle prospects who are like really good. Like, this guy got 950 reps in his college career in pass blocking because they just drop back to pass every time. But the guy would maybe weigh 280 pounds or something, because that was what that scheme needed. But if defensive linemen are all like, if there's going to be 5 guys in the defensive front who are bigger than you, that seems like a bit of an issue.
Yeah, I think it's kind of twofold. One, I think that at every level of football, you're actually spending less time in the office. So players are actually not spending as much time at the college level. There's rules now in place for collegiate athletes, how much time that they can actually be in the facility. The NFL level is even stricter about it. I mean, you have guys that in the offseason can't even, unless it's like a designated workout day, cannot physically walk into they play for the organization, but they can't physically walk into that facility. They have to go somewhere else. So what that twofold is one, we are spreading the ball out at the college level. So we are getting quicker offensive line play. I think it's also kind of like, I think of it as like the fast food of O-line blocking. It's mostly zone. You're not really supposed to hold on to your block. The ball's getting out quick at the college level. Even the deep choice stuff that Art Briles made really famous at Baylor, that Tennessee runs today, that stuff, I mean, those guys aren't really blocking that. If you go and you watch their offensive linemen, I mean, they are foot to foot, and they are just kind of running zone. Like you said, it's zone left or zone right, and we're kind of duck walking our way over there. And then the ball's supposed to get out under a 2.5 seconds. The other part of that is the practice part. I really do believe offensive line play is probably, the outside of quarterback, is probably the most technical position on the defense. Corner is probably right there with it. In fact, there's so much correlation between corner play and O-line play, because it's the only 2 positions in football that go backwards to start. Especially and I'm specifically talking about pass sets. So I think it's twofold. I think the trickle up, they're just not as skilled. You're not getting the skilled labor that you used to get from these schools, but then also you're not able to enhance that with the time to actually practice.
Yeah, I mean, it feels pretty difficult to get better at your job if you're not allowed to
Right.
practice getting better at your job. Now, there's this other element of like, well, some of the great quarterbacks are not playing anymore. Big turnover. I'm hesitant to give that as an excuse though, because even guys like, Mahomes is having, I mean, Mahomes has like a lower ADOT than Gardner Minshew, Josh Allen, who like kind of made his hay being sort of a scramble artist and throwing these deep balls and things. And it's like, well, that Joe Brady takes over that offense and he's
Yeah.
just like, all right, enough of that. Enough of that. We're throwing to the running backs. We're signing Curtis Samuel. Khalil Shakir is going to be a bigger part of the offense. And to be honest, like I am hesitant, even with the Chiefs, who I'm a Chiefs fan, but I'm even hesitant to be like, oh, this is a really good job by Andy Reid and Matt Nagy. Because I feel like if you're a defensive coordinator going into the game knowing that like the offense doesn't even want to try and test your safeties and test your corners and let the wide receivers win, to just be like, nope, we're going to run the ball, a lot of quick throws like that to me almost feels like kind of giving the defense a break.
No, I do agree with you. And I look, the NFL has gone through this. We've lost generational talent. Like we're always going to have that. I think the players are always going to play the game. The game never stops. I do think right now that we have the offenses it's been so easy really since 2017 when everybody started running these quote unquote college system type plays and defenses weren't able to adjust. Now defenses have gotten smart about it. We're not running Tampa 2, we're running non-traditional Tampa. So you don't know what the Tampa 2 is going to look like. And you don't know what we're going to be in at the beginning of the play. We could be in a too high shell, but I can change it up. I call it really Tampa is a whiteboard coverage, meaning that it's just X's on a board and you can just put guys wherever you want. You're just building triangles. I think with the Fangio system of being able to move the quarter half structure, everybody thinks Fangio's a quarters guy. He's not at all. In fact, I would argue that he's like anti-quarters. He really just wants to run quarter half, but he wants to stack the triangle on the best receivers. So we're getting what I call a zone double no matter what. And then if you want to run them on a crossing route, guess what? I got a poach safety on the other side. And all poach safety means is I'm taking any vertical that I'm basically a trash man picking up trash on the high intermediate, which is the number one play in the NFL right now, which is some sort of a Y cross. So to me, that's where we are. They've just essentially mitigated a lot of the risks that you have. So if you want to do it, you're going to have to find ways. I think that's why more teams are experimenting with 12 personnel, because when you go 12 personnel, now I defensively have to change, or you look like the Cowboys and you can't stop the run at all. You're basically built for third and long.
So that was I read your article and I was thinking through it and I was like, okay, well, what would I do? What would I do if I was like, I'm tired of this. I want to create some space. I want to be able to run, but I want to be able to threaten the defense. And I think the obvious answer is definitely 12. The issue you have is that who has two good tight ends?
Right.
Like maybe you've got one who can catch and one who can block, but you very rarely have one that can do. The Ravens kind of have it, although Mark Andrews is like really having a tough season recovering from that tightrope surgery. Like maybe the Chiefs a little bit with Noah Gray. But I mean, like I think Brock Wright had 4 catches on Sunday for the Lions. Like they went a little bit more 12. McVay, who's like never, ever in his career for 20 years played 12 personnel, was using 12 against the 49ers. I mean, they have a lot of injuries, but like it does feel pretty obvious. But then it runs into the offensive line problem again, where you're like, sure, I can toss out AJ Barner. No disrespect to AJ Barner, it's just the first name that came to mind for the Seahawks. Like I can put him out there, but what like AJ Barner can probably be covered by like the average linebacker in the NFL.
Right. So this actually happened before. This happened in the 80s. So in the 80s, we have Lawrence Taylor in the 3-4. Guess who's also there with Parcells, Bill Belichick. So we end up getting these hybrid edges. It's the first time people had done it. In the 70s, we had Arnsparger and the 53 defense that was using Bill Matheson as really he wasn't a very good off-ball linebacker, but what if we put him on the offense? What if we put him on the line and we kind of rush him, but we can also drop him into coverage? So what they did was like, what if we just put an absolute freak at edge that these tackles who are like 275 pounds and they basically all they can do is down block? What was that going to do? Well, you end up with an offense that's basically getting killed. I mean, Joe Theismann, literally his career has ended on Monday Night Football by LT. So what Gibbs decides to do with Washington is like, what if I put like a move tight end? And so this is where we get 12 personnel and the H-back. So the H-back is a hybrid tight end, hybrid fullback. We're going to move him over to help with protection. So to your point with what about that second tight end? He's there to chip so I can get my hybrid running back out on a pass. And then he's just going to go to the flat as a check down if I don't need him in. But it releases, Travis Kelce or even a Kittle, Laporta, Hawkinson from actually having to stay inside and actually play tight end. We can now move him down the field. I think that's why Kittle's like insane. He has like the highest ADOT of any tight end, and yet he's
like the best. Like right now he's like the best because he can do both. He's like this unbelievable third tackle blocker who like changes everything in the run game. The 49ers are way worse when he's not in. And he's good, crazy explosive, and he can catch the ball, and he can beat a safety. Like it's kind of like the why is Kyle Pitts never happened thing. And it's, well, Pitts isn't a good enough blocker to be on the field enough and to just like beat any linebacker. And he's also not fast enough and like agile enough to beat defensive backs. So he's kind of like what Pitts always reminds me of is like the 6'8" power forward who can't shoot threes. It's like, yeah, it looks like he should be really good, but he can't. He just doesn't. He's a tweener, He's a man without a position. Also, while you're talking, I'm wondering, well, couldn't fullbacks come back? Couldn't like 240-pound guys who run 4.6s, but they break tackles, like that guy should have a role. If second tight ends aren't going to do it, why can't fullbacks come back? Like Larry Centers or guys like that. Like that would be a super valuable thing to combat this.
Yeah, and I think they are going to come back. And I think the reason why is the exact same reason why you said is that now it gives the offense another option that's closer to the line of scrimmage. They can block. We can hand the ball off to them. Juszczyk is, to go with the 49ers again, they put him out there and they run him on slot fades, and he's going to beat most linebackers. So I do think that that's another option. I think also, too, of just running different personnel groups, not always being in 12 personnel, not always being in 21 personnel, but being multiple, and that it really stresses the defense to figure out, okay, what personnel can I put on the field that's going to match up and that we can't necessarily get found out because they're going to find space. That's the biggest difference between 20 years ago and today is that offenses are experts at creating space, regardless of what personnel is on. The spread's won. We're not going back. Like offenses want to score points. And I think that's why we're seeing so much frustration right now. And
correct me if I'm wrong, offensive coaches don't like to do that. They don't like to switch the personnel because everyone got so radicalized during the spread era and the Chip Kelly stuff that made its way to the NFL of, well, no, we want to dictate the matchup and then keep the defense and their personnel. So we don't want to make a sub. If we get the defense with 6 defensive backs, we want to be able to run and pass equally effectively out of our base set. And now, I suppose with scoring down, there's probably less of a penalty of slowing the offense down and doing the substitutions and letting the defense match.
No, and you're exactly right. I think I was there when Art Briles decided to play a tight end in the backfield instead of going 10 personnel, and it completely revolutionized the offense. That's when, actually we were better offensively after Robert Griffin than we were when we had Robert Griffin. So I think like that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make with that is that, yes, McVay wants to run all 11 so he can go fast, he can line up, he can see what it is. That's really what he wants. He just wants to see how you're going to line up, and then he's going to pick the play that's going to beat you. So It's just a different way of running tempo, but it's the same concept. And I think now, if you're not going to score points, you now have to really be intentional about the plays that you're calling. And so therefore the packages are back. I really think too, another reason why a lot of people don't want to run different packages is because you have to teach it. And if not everybody knows what they're doing, I think this is where defenses are ahead of offenses. I think defenses can have schematic fluidity. We can run big nickel, we can run nickel, we can be in base, and we can run the exact same pressure. But but you don't know that because we're in a different package, and we can present the back end a different way. Offenses are like, well, this guy's really good at doing this, and so we can only package these plays around him, and so we're limited in what we can do. Or maybe, why waste 30 minutes of practice working 3 plays that we're going to get from this specific package, and how can we teach it, and how does it go? And so I think what it ends up coming is, remember, you only are allotted so much time. So that's your bank account. How much are you willing to take out of that bank account just for these specific plays? And I think that's where some are really gifted at it. I think, like, for instance, Shanahan is really good at mixing things up and doing different things. I think that there's other, the Ben Johnson with the Lions, we're going to put an extra tackle on the field, but then now the next play we're in actual 12 personnel, but then the next way we're in 11 personnel, but we switch a guy, and now St. Brown's outside instead of inside. And so I think that, to me, is there's some guys that are really good at it, and then there's other guys like McVay, and McVay does a good job, don't get me wrong, but obviously, but he wants to just see. I want to see what you got, and then I'm going to call the play, and I'm going to do it as the least possible time I possibly can. I'm going to give myself as much time.
Now, there's this other thing going on. We touched a little bit about quarterback play. So we now have multiple instances of these dudes who've been in the NFL for 10 years, 15 years. Joe Flacco, Andy Dalton. There's been other guys too. I mean, Stafford kind of turning the clock back last year. It's like, in my mind, I'm like, well, Andy Dalton, dude, he's been seeing cover 2 since the first time it came around. And Andy Dalton had the first game of 300 yards and 3 passing touchdowns in the NFL in week 3.
Yeah.
And it's like, I watch Anthony Richardson, guy looks completely lost. Caleb, I'm not saying he looks lost, but he looks frazzled. He just looks super frazzled. I mean, Bryce Young, like, in that experiment, it just could not have gone any worse. And I'm just like, well, I don't really think Andy Dalton is better than Caleb Williams. I don't even really think Andy Dalton is better than, like, what Anthony Richardson could be. Do you think that comes down to practice time? Do you think that comes down to reps? Or, the thing I thought was so interesting about the article you wrote was, one, there was this, I've been parroting this line all week. It's that sometimes the quarterbacks and the coordinators can't know what defenses are doing until they watch the tape the next day, which that seems very confusing to play against. If you, like, literally do not know what the defense is doing, you're kind of just having to pick a spot and go to it. Is it just that these guys have been doing the pattern matching for so long that they could almost do it with their eyes closed? They know what the defender is going to do, and they know where the ball needs to go?
Yeah, I think that has a lot. They're seeing the pattern. They've seen the patterns more. So the more I'm exposed to different patterns, the more quickly I'm able to recognize those patterns. There's only certain things that you can do on defense. Yes, we're building different triangles. We're building different boxes. We're moving guys around. I think at the college level, a lot of these guys are just seeing static coverages. At the college level, the talent differential is wide. It's like the Grand Canyon. So they're like, look, we got to make sure guys are lined up. We got to make sure that we are on top of verticals, and then we're going to make sure that we get to the right spots. The problem that we have at, like, the college level when you want to run disguises is that, again, it goes back to the players being able to do that, IQ of the players being able to do that. And so what you get is, okay, I know on third down, I'm getting these 2 or 3 things, and then I can usually tell by where one of the safeties is going what that is going to be. Where at the NFL level, all these guys are self-scouting. And so they're building a mental model for you that is constantly rechanging every single week. What you thought you saw in week 1, they're going to give you the exact same presentation, the exact same look. They're going to give you the exact same steps. So in your mind, you're like, especially as a young quarterback, you're like, I know this, I'm locked in. And then you snap the ball and it completely changes. And so I think, like, we saw this with Stroud and the Vikings this weekend of just Flores giving things that, hey, this is what we did against the 49ers. but then we're not going to give you that exact same look. We're actually going to do a completely different look in the back end, and we're going to change it, and then we're going to rechange it the next week. And so again, when you go with these interchangeable parts that these defenses are now using, it makes it complex for the offense, but it makes it very simple for the defensive players to then do that. And I think that's part of the quarterback conundrum that we're having right now, and why we're seeing that go down.
I mean, I as a fantasy football guy, I do hate the defenses being ahead of the offenses. And I think what's more frustrating is I keep waiting. I'm like, oh, well, someone's going to figure it out. And it's like, we'll see glimpses of it. Like, you know, the Saints look so good in week 1 and week 2. McVay was able to get his guys going. The 49ers, I mean, they did lose to the Rams, but they still look all right. And it's doubly frustrating because kind of the way I read it is like, well, the analytics guys are actually on the defensive side of the ball right now, and it's the dinosaurs on offense, right? It's Shane Waldron, it's Schottenheimer, it's these guys who've been around forever. Although Shane Waldron should know better. He was on that commander staff. I was doing some research today, found out that Wade Phillips' kid was also on that commander staff in 2014, which is like, my God, so that's like half the NFL at this point. But the thing that feels most frustrating is I don't see a solve here. Like, this is really dramatic. And it feels dramatic more in of like, oh, we'll make this schematic change. It feels more dramatic to your point about the practice times of like something might have to fundamentally change with like the NFL as an organization, as a multi-billion-dollar business between the NFL and the NFLPA to kind of level the playing field. And maybe that's too dramatic. I don't know. How do you see it?
Well, I think you have to be smart now about the way you run. I think I tweeted this out this morning. Kevin Cole, who's worked for PFF, he writes Unexpected Points on Substack as well. He kind of had the deal about like, the Saints at the beginning, the first 2 weeks, were just killing everybody on runs over expected, and then this week they were in the negative, and so they were running into heavy boxes. To me, what ends up happening is it's not necessarily about establish the run or run the damn ball. It's about being smart about when you do it, being varied in the way you do it, using motion to move people, create space in the box when these boxes are loaded. When you're playing a too high shell, how can I occupy these safeties long enough so that I can get that extra space in the gap? And I think that's where it's going to separate with offense coordinators. Look, we've been through this doomsday scenario before. Again, in the 80s, we had this with everybody running the 3-4 and running fire zones, and people couldn't figure it out. And then you had Dick LeBeau add the secondary into it, and people were like, this is crazy. We can't get anything off. And so, we have had these ebbs and flows. I think it's a little bit too much of a knee jerk or a panic to be like, okay, something's got to change. We've been scoring all these points. I think we've gotten used to scoring points. I think people have forgotten 10 years ago, the NFL was essentially an I formation league. You got in an I formation, and it was a man on man, and you played man outside, and you had Megatron and Randy Moss and these big ISO ball, hero ball guys. Andre Johnson's another great example. And so
wide receivers are small now. Garrett Wilson is 6 feet tall, 190 pounds. I guess Odunze is a little bit bigger. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a little bit bigger, but it's like kind of the ideal NFL wide receiver now is a guy who wins intermediate and is super shifty, not a guy who goes and wins one-on-one and catches jump balls.
Well, and I do think like a guy like Nico Collins to me is very interesting. Justin Jefferson, again, is very interesting. CeeDee Lamb is another one that, you can put him anywhere. I think that's where we're getting at now, is that you can't just be kind of a one-trick pony. You can't be like Jamar Chase, for instance, is – he's a fantasy nightmare, right? Because 1 week he's got 150 passing yards, and then the next week he's got 50 or he's got 30, and he completely disappears. And it really is just because, if T. Higgins isn't playing, they can just double him, or he's playing a good corner that can kind of block him out because he doesn't really run that a dynamic route tree. And so what ends up happening is like these offenses are going to have to start getting creative. I think we saw this with, Rodgers kind of went through this kind of growth with LaFleur. Now he's kind of regressed back with Hackett, but a lot of pre-snap motion of, hey, let's move some guys to get that clear picture for you. Let's get a zone man ID.
Right.
Defenses, though, on the other hand, have now, I know this just because talking to defense coordinators all the time, at the higher levels, they're creating these man indicators,
Yeah,
but they're
they're
going to play
faking it.
zone. Yeah, well, the Broncos. So Mayfield actually had an interception. The Broncos actually did a really good job. They put Pat Surtain inside on top of Evans. Everything looks like man. There was a motion in between it in before. Okay, everything looks like man. Mayfield thought he had an ISO one-on-one, and the deep half safety comes from nowhere because he was in the middle of the field. He comes from nowhere to pick it. And so I think offenses now are going to have to adjust the way that they're attacking defenses. They're going to have to use motion more. They're going to have to use different formations. They're going to have to do different things. I think that, the Chiefs are probably the one team that's kind of come down, and they've kind of come to the equilibrium. They've been dealing with this now since 2000. Everybody basically playing cover two
Makes me
against them.
sick.
So, and they do a good job with Kelsey of moving him around, short motions, getting into stacks, getting into bunches, attacking the intermediate, getting those guys sucked in, and then we take the shot deep. So I just think you have to be more careful when you take your shots. And I think that you have to be a little bit more nuanced in the way that not only do you run the ball, but how you're pre-packaging that pre-snap look for the defense.
Well, actually bring it back towards the draft. I mean, do we maybe see a shift towards the guys who don't have to beat the coverage, like George Pickens? George Pickens, great example of this. George Pickens doesn't have to be his guy. Can be blanketed, can have no yards of separation at the catch point, and can generate a positive play. DK Metcalf had a great one on Sunday. Not the 71-yard touchdown where Grubb just got him wide open, but right before Charbonnet's touchdown, his first one, he made this incredible sideline catch where the defender was in between him and the ball, and he basically just plucked it away from him, got his feet down. I mean, is that the way where it's actually we spent the last 4 years being like, oh, we need Jackson Smith and Jigba, we need Chris Olave, we need. It's funny, they're all Ohio State guys, but actually we want to go the other way. I want Xavier Legette. I want Keon Coleman. I want the 6'3", 220-pound guy who is going to be way bigger than your corner. Might not be faster, but he's definitely going to be bigger and can create, like, kind of he's a space creator because he doesn't need any space, if that makes sense.
No, and I think that that's what you're going to have to do on offense. You're almost going to have to specialize. Okay, we're going to have this guy as our kind of our hero ball guy. We're going to have our power slot guy that's kind of the big slot guy that can really match up with these which could be a flex tight end. We're going to have a slot guy like a Christian Kirk that it's just a Rashee Rice is another one. Deebo Samuel that's just a mesh killer, right? Like he's just running shallow crosses. He's going to get us the yak. He's going to do that. I also think that offenses are being a lot smarter about. I think running back has become an added value position. You have to be able to catch the ball now. You have to be able to be a little bit shifty, but they're also helping those guys out, creating different ways. The big thing last year was escort screens. Right, of where we're actually going to send somebody out with the check down. We know you're going to run zone, so we're just going to give them a lead blocker. We're already going to get 5 out. We're wasting a guy in it anyway, so let's just send them out there. I think too, just the cheap motion stuff that we saw with the Dolphins, finding more clever. Again, there are answers out there. You just have to be willing to go look for them. And then also, I just think that the way defenses are set up, it's what I've always talked about. I mean, it's match quarters. You have 4 across. You're even. We're adjusting for motion. We have layers on the backside. We can close the post if we need to. We can stay on the hash if we need to. I just think that defenses have gotten nuanced, and offenses, especially the kind of the old hats, are so used to having these static structures. I mean, this is why Zimmer, to me, I was always interesting with Zimmer, and I live in DFW, so I hear about it all the time. Oh, the defense. Okay, we've got a new defense coordinator, and I'm sitting here, I'm like, guys, he's like 90% static. What you see is what you get. And in this league, that's like playing Madden on rookie. Like they, and to your point with the older quarterbacks, if you're going to play static, these guys are going to eat you up. And so I think, to me, especially on later downs, having some adjustments, doing different things, being multiple, and then also having a disguise off of that, I think that's where we're at. And I think offensive coordinators are also okay with, look, if you're going to play too high, we're just going to run the ball. But the caveat to that is you need to be smart about it and not necessarily run into these boxes that aren't conducive to what you're trying to do.
Well, we saw Matt LaFleur do that the last 2 weeks with Malik Willis. It wasn't just handing it off off guard, the 30 times. They were getting a lot of guys in motion. I mean, obviously he does kind of have that Shanahan trickle down zone blocking scheme that, I mean, does seem to just kind of make things super easy on the running back. But yeah, if you can create explosives out of the run game, then your need to pass to score, not like, obviously you'd like to score in 2 plays as opposed to 10. But if the defense is going to give you 5 yards per play on the ground, and I wonder if that kind of tarts, like, I wonder if there will be some defensive coordinators that are just like, dude, I am sick of this. I am sick of just getting, like, we just lost 3 games in a row because we gave up 180 yards rushing 3 games in a row. And sure, they didn't beat us down the field, but our quarterback had the same problem their quarterback had, and they ran the ball better than us. Like, I'm sure there are going to be some defensive coordinators that are like, enough of this. I'm changing. I'm doing something else because I don't want to get ran on.
Well, I think the Jets against the Patriots was a good example of that. Saleh just said, fine, look, we're going to play big nickel. We're going to put Ashton Davis down there, and then we're also going to play more base. We're going to play 3 linebackers. I think the problem that you're going to run into is that there are certain teams. Cowboys are a great example of this. The Bills looked like they were going to struggle a little bit with Taron Johnson out. Obviously, the defensive line is playing really, really well, but I think they're going to run into a team that's just going to be able to bully them a little bit. And how are you going to react to that? Are you going to be able to put a guy down? Are you going to be able to go big nickel? I think that's where, like, Mike McDonald and that whole Ravens squad, one of the things that happened this offseason, and no, I didn't see enough people talking about it, was that all those guys that got hired away, they all went out and got 3 starting safeties. And the reason why they did that was so that they can play big nickel. And that all that means is that you can play 3 safeties. So I know that you still want to pass the ball, even though you're in 12 personnel, but I have a guy and I can protect him with front structure. You can do this with front structure. You play, instead of playing a lot of 2 gap, so I'm going to press the offensive lineman, put my head in a gap, but then I can also play the other gap, that kind of system. I'm going to put you actually in a gap, and I'm going to shoot you through that gap, and I'm going to make it really easy, and I'm going to protect you with the front. You can do that with a big nickel, and the safety being able to fold back inside. It also allows you to carry all of your scheme. You're not losing anything, and you also don't have a 185-pound corner out there trying to stop the run against 12 personnel. And I think that was not talked about enough. And that, if you go and you look who's having success right now, Seattle's defense looks really, really good. I think the Ravens are going to clean some things up. I mean, anytime that you lose that much just IQ talent off of the coaching staff and then also on the field, you're going to struggle. But I think that, like, we're seeing Mike McDonald, Jesse Minter, I think, is going to do a really good job with the Chargers. Already been doing a very good job early in this year, having 3 safeties. Molden comes in that can play corner, but he can also play, you have a guy like that. And Derwin James, one of the best box linebackers. The other one that nobody talks about just because they don't have the personnel is the Cardinals. Cardinals have been playing 3 high safeties now for 2 years, and not enough people are talking about it.
They just get beat up by everyone.
I know, and that's the problem up front. And so that's kind of that caveat is, like, if you don't have a pass rush, if you don't have the horses up front, people can game control you. So, okay, you shut us down, but we're going to get everything underneath, and then we're also going to be able to run the ball on you, and that's going to create problems. That's going to force you to get into looks that you don't like, and then that's when we take the shot. So I think there are people out there that are doing a really good job of playing hybrid schemes for what we're seeing from the adjustment early on from offenses.
So, again, as you're talking, I'm wondering, another solve here would be quarterback runs, right? It would be, I really don't like what Cliff Kingsbury is doing with the Commanders offense and turning this incredible deep ball thrower into a check down Charlie. But, like, if you are thinking schematically, like, okay, how do I make the defense for just playing so far away from the line of scrimmage? One of the things you can do, especially if you do have at least one wide receiver who really has to be respected down the field, like the Cardinals do. Mm-hmm. Like, Kyler has been really awesome scrambling. He did not play very well against the Lions on Sunday, but that's kind of neither here nor there. Where if your quarterback can just consistently get you first downs when there's not really anything there, I mean, that feels like you're really putting the defense in jail. If the 4-man rush doesn't get home and your safeties and your corners are past the first down marker, or even just designed runs, right? Then you're really, if you have Anthony Richardson and you're like, my guy's bigger and stronger than you, and we're going to run into these light boxes 11 on 11. I mean, that again feels like another way to really punish the defense for going smaller.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that over time with the NFL. I mean, someone asked me the other day, I do like a little data download every Wednesday on match quarters, and somebody was like, "You didn't put 2-man in there," and I'm like, "Yeah, because it's negligible. Like nobody runs 2-man anymore unless you're like playing Tua. You're not going to do it." So the running quarterback has completely changed coverage schemes and why you do it. That's why you run a little bit more too high. You want to go cover 3 or you want to go cover 1. Your quarterback player is now 30 yards deep. So now you're in big trouble. So it changes. I think what you're also alluding to is like it also changes the way you play that post safety. So if I am going to play cover 3, I'm going to cheat him, meaning that he's going to basically play flat foot. So that's where that quarterback run and the play action a lot of times can open some things up down the field. I go back to you have to start doing a little bit more smarter things, and you have to adjust to what the defense is giving you, which we've seen some teams like the 49ers. Again, we go back to Shanahan and McVay. There's a reason why there's so many people talking about them. And Shanahan is willing. Look, if you're going to give him yak, he's going to create yak. He's going to create yards after the catch, and he's going to give it to you. And like the Rams forever with Raheem Morris and Brandon Staley would always struggled against the 49ers because he was fine throwing underneath and then letting his athletes run. And I think that's where now with the added value, you have to be added value with the at running back. That's why when people were just, oh my gosh, it's the greatest backfield ever with Derrick Henry and Lamar, I always was like, hey, pause for a second, because he's really an I back. He's really a downhill back. Lamar's really a shotgun quarterback. Zone read quarterback. They don't really mesh well with what they're trying to do, and you can't really throw the ball to Derrick Henry, even though he's a big guy. You would wish that he could. He's like 6'3", but he's not really a downfield catcher. So I think that's where we are. The guys like Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey. There's a reason why those Alvin Kamara is having a resurgence. Are we surprised? It's the Kubiak Shanahan tree. They know how to use their running backs. They know how to get them open downfield. They know how to target linebackers that can't cover. And I think that's where you're at right now. The Lions are another great example of using Gibbs in different ways to get him open down the field or to get him open in space. I think running backs are going to have a little bit of a renaissance. The problem is, though, you can't just be a Derrick Henry anymore or an Adrian Peterson anymore. Those guys are generational. They'll get drafted. But if you're a big stand-up, upright running back, you're probably not getting drafted in the first round anymore.
Yeah, Bo Scarborough. He missed his calling, man. Bo Scarborough would have led the NFL in rushing in 1984. Sadly, his time missed. Okay, I don't have the right verbiage to ask this question, but I'm gonna do my best. Why does that route combination of like shakes, where you've got the two wide receivers out to the one side, the one guy runs the in-breaking post route, and the other guy runs the out-breaking option route? Why does that not work a lot, assuming the wide receivers run their route correctly? Like, why is that not the answer to this? Because that feels like, to me, with a very rudimentary football understanding, that feels like it leaves you in no man's land if you are the safety. Feels like you can't make a good decision there.
Well, I think spacing in the NFL is different. That somebody floated that out the other day when people were
Ethan Sherwood-Strauss, a former guest of this podcast, did write that article. And I, again, as an offensive guy, I'm like, sold. Put it hashes. Let's do it for week 3. Let's get it in.
Right. Well, it's a double-edged sword, because really, if you ask, the joke around defensive coaches is if you play 7-on-7 against anybody, where does the ball go? It goes right in the middle. So it's like that way. Oh, I got the whole field to go with. I can spread you out all the way. So that's part of the reason. I think also too, you're not seeing a lot of match structures in the NFL outside of early down. So if you get spread, it's going to be more zone centric. The match is really on the overhang to allow the safety to go into an apex or a deep half. The corners are playing a little bit more of a trail technique. So they're seeing this, they're seeing the post, they're seeing the corner or the sail route a lot sooner, and they're able to cut it off. I still think, guys that run a lot of digs, a lot of dagger, which is the seam with the dig, those routes still work. I think also shallow, which is the mesh route with a dig behind it. To me, those routes are always going to be kind of the ones that work, just because you're high-lowing the defense and then you're throwing to where that one hook drop or that vertical drop is not. Play action then amplifies this, get those linebackers. This is why, the argument is you should play action every time. just because, the defense always bites on it, even if it's in a passing situation. And that is true, but I think we're getting better. I think linebackers are getting more nuances that are, hey, we're pass first. We'll get to the line second. And so I think you're seeing those go down. So you, again, running the ball and establishing it, getting those guys to suck up, and then being able to drop it underneath in a lot of these intermediate routes. One is easy for the quarterback, but it also a lot of times get your receivers running while they're catching the ball, which is going to give you more yardage after.
Yeah, there is a huge premium on Yak, which I guess is an argument for bringing back the Andre Johnson style wide receiver. Is that guy is just not going to move as well after the catch. All right, I feel smarter. I feel at least like I'll be able to fake my way through some conversations this week about defense. This is actually the last thing I wanted to ask you. I have recently transitioned to solopreneurship myself, doing all this stuff myself. So I'm just kind of curious, what kind of led to you doing the Substack thing and just being like, this is what I want to do. This is the direction that I'm going in. And yeah, just kind of, I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, I think 10 years when I left Baylor in 2014, right after the Fiesta Bowl. I didn't really know what I was going to do other than I was going to go coach high school football here in Texas. I was kind of lost for about 2 years, didn't know what I wanted to do. And then I started writing. I've always enjoyed writing. The problem is when you're a coach and you're a writer, I mean, what are you going to write about? I'm not going to write the next Harry Potter. So I was like,
right,
what if I just start writing about football? I'll put it on the worst place in the world to put anything out, which is the internet, and I'll see if people like it. And so people started liking it. I started building a rapport, building coaches around the country. COVID probably was the best thing that happened to me.
For a lot of people, man. Yeah.
Yes, I look, as bad as it was I know for me and for several other people, like it finally put a pause. I had no idea how hard I was working in coaching. And then I just decided, what if I could do this full time? I'd been looking at a way to get some sort of a pay wall or something with match quarters, kind of getting, how can I turn this into a business model? And then Substack being able to do that in 2020. And then it just really exploded off of that. I knew in 2020, I was pretty close to being done, especially when, you can be a head coach here in the state of Texas and make really good money. But you're also going to have to hire the women's softball coach. You're going to have to hire the men's soccer coach. Like you're going to have to go be admin at JV games. Like I did, like to me, the time suck. I just wanted to do football and I wanted to write about it. And I had a lot of friends in a lot of different places. And I was like, this is the way that I can get back to the game. And so that's when I started doing it. And then Substack was kind enough to overhaul everything, bring everything over from WordPress.
Wow.
It was awesome.
Yeah, that's big.
Yeah, well, I had just randomly, and I randomly just grassroots, I had become one of their top sports subscriptions. I mean, right now I have over 14,500 of just subscribers, just free subscribers to the website, and it's growing every single day. And so it's just, it's awesome. And being able to do that. And there's a lot of people that support me in this and want to see me. I've got a lot of coaches that are like, please don't go back to coaching. Like I get all my ideas from you and everything, but no, that's kind of what led it to me to do this, is that I enjoyed the classroom and I enjoyed the kids, but at that point I was pretty much burned out in the classroom. I wasn't a great teacher anymore. And I just wanted to pivot and do this full time. And I'm glad I was given the opportunity to do that.
That's very cool. And you weren't interested in, going around the country, changing your job every 8 months and being.
Yeah, I think my wife she's awesome and she's a saint, but like, she's not a football wife. And like, even just moving around, the state of Texas is about as close to Division I football as you can get. And so we were going to have to move. Even moving across Dallas is daunting. I don't know if you've ever been to Dallas, but it's like,
it's
massive.
It's massive.
And so like, even just moving, and we have a good spot where we're at. My parents are here, her parents are here. And it was just like, look, man, life sometimes it takes precedent over kind of what you want your ego wise to be. And so I just decided, you know what, let's do this full time and let's really get into it. And to have that support structure has been awesome.
It is, if people don't know, and I don't think a lot of people do know how crazy like getting in the college ranks can be, because your fate is tied to your head coach.
Yes.
If your head coach gets fired, just bad luck of results, Matt Rule becomes available and someone wants to, or just any NFL coach becomes available, and you got big boosters at your school and they want to make a splash, even if you're doing a good job, it's like, all right, well, University of Central Florida needs a special teams coordinator, so I guess it's truly insane. Like I think about that watching college football on Saturdays, not so much on Sundays, because I'm like, you guys, it's much less crazy there, and once you kind of get an NFL job, you're gonna have a job forever. But I mean, these dudes who are calling, the tight end coach for Colorado State on a Saturday, I'm like, dude, you have grinded so goddamn hard to get there. And it's like, so if you ever do, just get in a conversation with one of those guys, tell them you appreciate having a product to watch, because it is a real fucking grind to be a college football coach.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, like, I even go back. I was really lucky getting in. I had to actually work for a year for free to even get in. The NCAA passed the bylaw to add 2 more GAs. I was on staff. I got that, but then I was done the year that before Philip Montgomery leaves to go to Tulsa, and you don't really, as a GA, you don't move on until somebody else moves on. And so it was perfect timing getting in, perfect timing getting out. Luckily, I was in the state of Texas as already certified teacher, so I could just go back and actually make money. I don't think these other people realize too, like outside of the Power 5, you really don't make money unless you're a coordinator or a head coach. And so I'm getting offers for like $25K, $30K. I've got a wife and a kid, and I'm like, man, I can go make 75 and just be a DC and at a 6A school in Texas and be home on the weekend. So to me, that definitely, if you see a college coach, especially at a lower level, man, shake their hand, because that is not an easy life, and they're all chasing the same dream. And
they're all chasing the same dream. Having nerds like me on the internet tell them that they're too good at their jobs and that the NFL needs to change the rules to make them at a schematic disadvantage. That's what they all want. So yeah, it's a real grind. Okay, let's go ahead and get out of here, guys. Make sure to check out matchquarters.com. You can follow Cody on Twitter. A link to all that will be in the description. That was awesome. Thank you very much for joining me, and I will be back with all you guys next week.